But it's refreshing to see a strong female lead character.
Yeah.
And it's becoming well, I don't want to say a trend. It's been happening more and more in genres of science fiction and fantasy, and it's good to see more of it. How do you see Kat contributing to, maybe, I don't know if I want to call it a narrative, but how does she fit in here?
I see her as, one of the things I did notice is that there's a lot of strong female protagonists in young adult books, and as in books specifically for adults, sometimes those characters, the female protagonist tends to struggle more, and sometimes is just kind of a mess. And I wanted to bring kind of a combination of that you can be a mess in some aspects of your life. You can be, in denial about things or naive about things, but you can still be strong and you can still move yourself forward. Kat is certainly, in this first book, she is working to move herself forward. She has a mentor to do that, but she doesn't do it very well all the time. She falls back on her old impulses a lot. And I guess that's where I wanted to kind of contribute to the idea of a strong female protagonist, that to be strong doesn't mean that you're infallible.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Homespun Script. I'm your host, Nate Knispel. Our guest today is Sarah Branson. Sarah is the author of several works of fiction set in the world of New Earth. Her 4-part series, Pirates of New Earth, has been described as, quote, more riveting than anything you can watch on Netflix tonight. A Merry Life, the first book in the series, which we'll be discussing today, won the 2022 Best of Indie Kindle Book Award. The series narrates the story of Kat Wallace as she grows from a traumatized, enslaved young woman, headstrong and angry, to a woman who will battle to protect her family and forge her destiny with a nation of swashbuckling pirates, all the while being pursued by a relentless enemy. Sarah, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure and privilege to talk with you.
It is a delight to be here, Nate. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I have worn several hats in my careers. I spent 30 years as a nurse midwife, attending families at home and in birth center and in hospitals. And I have taught both middle school and high school, both here in the U.S. and overseas in Japan and Brazil.
Wow.
And we have traveled quite a bit, my husband and I. And then as a kid, my dad was born under a wandering star, so he dragged us all over the U.S. and down to Australia, and which was kind of a watershed event for me, being on a ship going to Australia. And later in life, after towards the end of that 30 years of midwifery, I started to write a story, and that brought me up to this point. So I have now kind of embarked on that as my third career.
Mm-hmm. So I can see where the pirate theme may have come from, at least in part, if you were on a freighter ship, yeah.
Yes.
Or at least under a wandering star. That's a wonderful phrase. A Merry Life is your first book, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So how did A Merry Life, and maybe even the Pirates of New Earth series at large, how did this come to be?
Well, to then go back to that freighter ship, I was in third grade, and the captain on the ship was Australian, and it was the Hong Kong Beauty, and the crew was essentially Chinese and from Hong Kong and that area.
Oh.
And I reminded the captain, he had his grown daughter, so he indulged me and took me with him walking around on inspection of the ship, and I'm sure I was quite the charming child to kind of go, that's messy over there. I loved it, but I'm sure I was quite the little brat. It was at that point, because Fred Millwright, the captain, started would spin stories, and who knows where the truth was in all of them, but they made me happy, and there were pirates in the story, and I really had a lot of fun kind of running pirates in my brain, and that's where it started. And it percolated for a long time.
Mhm.
I think I've always wanted to write a story, but I never felt I had a story to tell. And it wasn't until I had a long commute, about an hour and a half, that I finally got tired of the podcasts, nothing personal, and the audiobooks and, music and all that. Eventually you just want to turn off all the sound and just kind of be in your own head.
Yeah.
And it was while I was doing that a character kind of hopped into my passenger seat and started telling her story. And that was Kat Wallace.
Mhm.
And so in my getting to know her, I got to know the Pirates of New Earth and what that
Mhm.
was. And that's really where the story came from.
Mhm.
It was the original draft was this big, long, 110,000 word
Oh my.
stream of consciousness about her
Mhm.
life that didn't have things like a plot, a narrative arc. Had to get that revised, but it was the getting to know her, and that's how it came to be. Because once I looked at that zero draft, I realized there were at least three books in it, and
Mhm.
the first part of it became A Merry Life.
Mhm. Cool. So there are two things that struck me initially when reading the book, and I'm going to take these sort of in reverse order since the character of Kat seems to be the main engine of the plot.
She
But you
is.
do have it set in a post-apocalyptic world, or something like a post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
world. It's the 24th century, I think, right?
Yeah, it's the 2300s. Yep.
Mhm. Let's see. Oh, yeah, you have this post apocalyptic world as your setting, and it's one which still manifests a lot of the same problems that we experience and see today.
Mhm.
And before we get in on Cat, which is probably going to take a while, I'd love to hear about your thinking on how you developed New Earth and why you kind of chose this setting.
It New Earth developed because of fires and floods and pandemics and famine, which
Hmm.
of course sounds somewhat familiar because
Yeah.
we're seeing
Hmm.
that everywhere. And that's
Published
always
after
true in science
2020.
fiction.
Hmm.
Exactly. And that was really during that pandemic time that this kind of started percolating in my head.
Oh,
But
yeah.
also, having taught science, climate change is something that I am very much aware of,
Hmm.
and looking at what will happen to the planet at that point. And so the question for me was, well, what happens if you have all of these things happen and it drops the human population dramatically,
Hmm.
and alters the planet? What kind of world is going to spring up from that point? And
Hmm.
I have a tendency to believe that there are some aspects of being a human that are never going to change, and that
Yeah.
is you're going to group together. Some people will have really positive things to do with the world, and some people have negative things to do with the world.
Hmm.
Some
Hmm.
people will be focused on what they can get for themselves, and other people will be looking with an eye on the past to try and make the planet a better place. And that's kind of how New Earth developed. So New Earth has aspects of it that are a bit utopian and ones that are pretty dystopian as well.
Hmm.
And some of them have developed, unintentionally through, just the needs of the people. For
Hmm.
example, slavery, because there was a low population, people needed workers, and so they just started enslaving people to become
Hmm.
workers.
Yeah. So it looks as though the pirate theme is also, well, maybe I even want to say New Earth, or the idea of New Earth is an outgrowth of the pirate theme.
Hmm. Well, and everybody loves pirates.
Oh,
At
totally.
least they love the past pirates and the future pirates. Nobody really
Hmm.
likes the pirates of the day,
Right.
because they are, we see them as the actual threat that they are.
Hmm.
Um, but I love the golden age pirate idea of being very egalitarian, and I
Hmm.
liked developing that idea that there was a group of enslaved people and thralls that were on the sea that eventually took over their own ships and you know went
Hmm.
pirate,
Hmm.
to be able to survive, and that they developed then into a fleet,
Hmm.
but that eventually they would not be sailing around. And what happens to pirates when they land on solid ground? And so that
Hmm.
was where Bosch, the island of Bosch, where the pirates are from, came about.
So is this a reference to the power tool, Bosch, or not?
It isn't. It's just the
Okay.
name that kind of came up. It's not the power tool,
Okay.
and it's not the kitchen appliance,
Okay.
or the detective that's on Netflix,
Okay. Or the artist, after whom I
or the
think the
artist.
detective is named. Yeah, Hieronymus Bosch. Yeah, I think the detective is actually named after him. I'm not sure on that though.
Neither am I.
It's interesting how, because the pirate society that you have, they're in large part based on being outside of the FA. What does FA stand for again? Federal Alliance.
FA is the Federal Alliance.
Okay, yeah, but the ruling state that is
Hmm.
dominant within the area, they're outside that and not subject to the rules, and
Hmm.
they pride themselves on that. But yet
Hmm.
their society is in many ways very regimented, so
Hmm.
it's not chaos. So yet they've developed their own way of, or their own organizational structure.
That's absolutely right. And some of it stemmed from the organizational structure of the old fleet, where
Mm-hmm.
they had, there were 5 ships, and so they end up with 5 generals at the table, but the master commander is elected and
Mm-hmm.
appointed, and also is the quartermaster. And everyone has a voice. But
Mm-hmm.
there's still a hierarchical aspect to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's also a very, you know, Bosch is a very diverse place, and the pirates are very diverse, and pirates in the
Yeah.
Golden Age were a diverse group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to include that. And again, I want to kind of make my own little utopia on Bosch, so I got to
Yeah.
make it
Mm-hmm.
nicely diverse and supportive. Although there's
Mm-hmm.
still, uglier aspects to it as well.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, that's one thing developing a world or a subworld within a post-apocalyptic society allows one to do. So like
Hmm.
all social institutions break down, so we get to see, all right, how are they going to rebuild again
Exactly.
in this context? And it's really interesting how you did that.
Hmm.
But the pirate society is not really the focal point of the book, and this is one thing I did appreciate about it, because you do a lot of world building, but it isn't world building in the sense of like the Silmarillion, where it's like
Hmm.
a history and then there's kind of a plot pasted on top of it that really
Hmm.
isn't that important.
Right.
The main thing, this is character. I'm sorry, a character driven plot. So world building is certainly present, but the first book, and I'm assuming the next few, I've only read a little bit of the second one, really seemed to focus on developing Cat Wallace
Hmm.
as a character. And I'd love to hear you tell me more about how you developed her. You already said you presence in the seat next to you when you were driving, but yeah, if you go more in depth, that'd
And
be great.
having read her, I know you can understand that when Cat Wallace tells you to do something, you generally do it.
Where you're going to get
Um,
hit.
yeah, you're going to get hit. There's weaponry and, and things involved.
Hit if you're lucky, maybe.
That's exactly right. But and yes, absolutely character driven, which is just my preference for the books I read and the movies I watch and any of the stories I like. I can go across a variety of genres, as long as there's a really good character that I can get behind, whether it's a good character or the antagonist at times. But if there's a character I can embrace, that's kind of my wheelhouse there. And so Cat developed over many months, mostly through playing make believe, having conversations. When I first kind of envisioned her, I didn't think in terms of, and now I'm going to write a story about her, because I didn't realize that was something that I had in me. So a lot of it was just, kind of imagining what she would do in situations. And then it became a scenario where I got to, start writing it down some. Cat stems from lots of influences in my life. I can't uh, be a midwife for 30 years and watch women and birthing people go through the events that occur during pregnancy and labor and birth and postpartum and not be in awe of how much how much people are able to tolerate, to take, to cope with, and to come out stronger and empowered because of it. So the idea of a young woman who was coming from a place where she had been traumatized and injured but was able to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
But not overcome it in some magical, I'm all better. Because I think we can all agree Kat's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
She makes a lot of mistakes. She
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have, she doesn't have any special powers. She's just somebody who is willing to work hard. And when she gets knocked down, she tries again.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I see all the time with
Mm-hmm.
people. And I think it resonates with readers because that's where we all are at. We all get knocked down and drag ourselves back up. So getting to know Kat has been a great adventure, and she
Mm-hmm.
spends a lot of time chattering in my ear even now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I have now wandered off from the question, and you probably need to
Oh no,
send me back.
I think you're still right on it. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's refreshing to see a strong female lead character,
yeah,
and it's becoming well, I don't want to say a trend. It's been happening more and more in
yes.
genres of science fiction and fantasy, and it's good to see more of it. How do you see Kat contributing to, maybe, I don't know if I want to call it a narrative, but
Well,
how does she fit in
I
here?
see her as one of the things I did notice is that there's a lot of strong female protagonists in young adult books,
Mm-hmm.
and as in books specifically for adults, sometimes those characters, the female protagonist tends to struggle more,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes is just kind of a mess. And I wanted to bring kind of a combination of that
Okay.
you can be a mess in some aspects of your life. You can be in denial about things or naive about things, but you can still be strong and you can still move yourself forward.
Mm-hmm.
Kat is certainly in this first book. She is working to move herself forward. She has a mentor to do that, but she doesn't do it very well all the time. She
Mm-hmm.
falls back on her old impulses a lot. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's where I wanted to kind of contribute to the idea of a strong female protagonist, that to be strong doesn't mean that you're infallible,
Right.
but she's way fallible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having a main character like that, which might be too strong or does everything correctly, sets maybe unrealistic expectations in terms of a role model.
100%.
Yeah, I remember reading Ender's Game when I was much younger and just thinking, oh boy, yeah, Ender
Yeah.
deals with trauma, but he's in a completely different world. And Kat is not in
Mhm.
a completely different cognitive. She's physically gifted in terms of her ability to do the military exercises necessary for what she has to do.
Mhm.
But in a lot of ways, yeah, she's very fallible. And I don't want to say, I
Mhm.
hesitate to use the word flawed, but she makes
Mhm.
decisions that seem logical at the time, or you can see
Mhm.
how she's coming to that conclusion, but all the while thinking, oh no, that's not really the best thing to do there.
Don't do it. Don't do it, girl. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. But yet she does.
yeah. The theme of trauma and abuse is, maybe, I don't want to say central, but it's a very significant part of the novel.
Mhm.
And Kat and her antagonist Abernathy are sort of are at the center of it. And
Mhm.
Abernathy isn't just abusive; he's a special kind of abusive.
Mhm.
And the sections where Kat recalls her experiences as a thrall, I imagine, must have been rather difficult to write. What was your approach toward this?
As I developed the character of Abernathy, who back in that zero draft, showed up and then kind of disappeared, but then in rereading and having early readers read it, my youngest son went, I don't know, he's a really good bad guy. So he was re-upped there. Um, Developing him and learning about him, I did reading about um, narcissistic personalities and sociopathic personalities and things like that to help kind of guide how he was going to act. And then it was just a matter of, how would someone like that behave?
Mhm.
And how, it's also how do people like that behave? Because there are sadistic narcissists like that out there. And so it was a matter of just kind of being in the character and writing what he would do, which generally when my husband would read those parts, he would, kind of say, I just think I want to scoot a little farther away from you when you're writing Abernathy. Because yes, he's a special kind of bad.
Yeah, he's not just physically abusive, but wildly manipulative.
Yes, he definitely, groomed her and abused her.
Yeah, and very good at playing the mental game as well as the physical game in terms of how he phrased everything or constructed a situation in which Kat was at fault for everything, at fault for her entire situation.
Yep.
And somehow he was the victim.
Somehow.
Yeah, very disturbing. So it's not just abuse and trauma. And you've mentioned before how being a midwife maybe gave you some insight into how people deal with trauma and reconcile it. And maybe if you could say a little bit more, I don't want to maybe get in details here, but maybe say a little bit more about how that worked its way in this.
Absolutely. Because again, you don't deal with as many families as I have without seeing women and birthing people who have come through traumatic events in their life. And most of the time, those were traumatic events of the past, but birth tends to bring up trauma.
Of course.
And so that needed to be dealt with. But there are certainly times that, some of the partners for my clients were not the nicest people in the world. And you could see how they manipulated and, psychologically abused the people. And, you work to help people get out of that situation, but that tends to be a situation that people have to come to some extent on their own. So there have been, seeing that kind of trauma, and trauma is rampant, particularly for women. I think it's true for men too, but again, I spent most of my career dealing with women, so I can speak to that mostly. But women, it's a very large percentage. What is it? 1 in 4 women are sexually abused in their lives. And the amount of emotional and psychological abuse is going to be even more so.
Yeah. It's always behind the curtain there.
And so it is just a commonality that as people have read it, they can all go, oh yeah, I know. I remember somebody like that. I remember, or I remember feeling like that. And, as much as I, would like there to not be that trauma, I think being able to speak to it and show how someone moves through their own trauma can be helpful for others.
Yeah. I want to ask if you have any recommendations on how to deal with this kind of trauma. I mean, part of a recommendation is how Kat deals with it and said through her.
She punches people.
Yeah. Common theme. You're going to get hit by Kat.
Exactly. Exactly. To deal with, for people to deal with trauma, they have to be able to address it, and they have to have a safe space to be able to address it. And for Kat, that was, her finding her adoptive family and her found family with Teddy and Miriam. It gave her a place where she could, start to process some of that. Even if she didn't process it through speaking with them, at least having a safe space where she could feel like, I can actually kind of think about these things now.
Right. Yeah. Just have the mental bandwidth to be able to do it, or emotional bandwidth.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very fortunate. Yeah. So it's not just trauma that you deal with in the book. You address several moral and ethical issues throughout in such a very short space. And I isolated, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I isolated 5 of them. And I think there are probably more, but you address maybe from not pretty directly the idea of assisted suicide.
Indeed. As a midwife, I worked in home, birth center, and hospital, but my heart's in home birth. 2 of my babies were home babies. I also feel like that's where I am on the spectrum for the end of life too. I'd like to die at home, quietly, peacefully, in a nice situation. And the idea of being able to have some control over our deaths is
Hmm.
very appealing. Obviously things happen and you don't get to control that all the time, but
Hmm.
um, you know, it's not something that Kat had a strong consideration of before she was asked to really think about it and think about how she felt about it. And so, her idea of it was that, if this is what someone wants, then I care about them, then I guess I can be there for them in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and she does think about it, but she makes her decision very quickly.
Hmm. She does, and to some extent, that's because of the relationship she has with the character.
Yeah.
You know, it's an important relationship, and so she's willing to. She sees that as someone who has done for her, so she's going to do for them.
Hmm. And also someone who is in full control of mental faculties, which is also
Yes,
very
exactly.
important in a situation like that.
Exactly.
So I'm just going to rattle off a couple others. We can deal with them in
Hmm.
time, but I also want to talk about your general approach toward writing about moral issues because it's
Hmm.
very tricky at times, I think. But
Hmm.
a couple others that I liked, the class structure in Edo. And I'm thinking
Yes.
of Yumiko's rumination on the capital letters, the way, on
The
I think it's
way.
page 223, where she
Hmm.
says, "Oh yes, some people are just born to be thralls, and that's
Hmm.
just the way it works, and that results in
The
a."
way. The way of the world.
Mhm.
Well, and having lived in Japan for a number of years, which I loved living in Japan, and I loved the Japanese people, but culturally, it is very egalitarian within and within the culture, but there are people that are on the outside.
Mhm.
The Yakuza people and immigrants and things like that. That as a society, that's where the hierarchy kind of falls,
Mhm.
and certainly for Yumiko, the idea of an outsider coming into Edo
Mhm.
and marrying into her family did not set well with her, and she
Right.
was able to rationalize a lot of her behaviors with the way um,
Mhm.
to to say, well, that's just that's how it's meant to be. So we just need to make sure that we just follow the way,
Mhm.
and that certainly could be a you know little pointed idea towards organized religion in our world. No matter what the religion is,
Mhm.
there are those people who fall back on organized religion to try and rationalize behaviors that probably are
Mhm.
inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. Maintaining a certain status quo
Hmm.
and referring to some kind of otherworldly or metaphysical
That's yeah.
justification.
Hmm. Hmm.
Very dangerous. Another thing that really fascinated me, the contrasting approaches toward governmental regulation that you have. The Free Alliance regulations prohibit slavery, but what is it, Bell Coast? Is that right?
Belfast, yep.
Bell
Hmm.
Coast falls just outside of, I think, geographically, the
Hmm. Yep.
Free Alliance, and so they're allowed to practice slavery.
That is absolutely right. The Federal Alliance is you know a somewhat loosely connected group of
Hmm.
countries across the world that kind of
Hmm.
joined together as New Earth opened up a little bit post apocalypse. And so, because it is a loose alliance, there are some of the countries that will go ahead and have their own laws, but within the main area of the Federal Alliance, slavery is outlawed. But
Hmm.
yes, it's geographically, someone could just say, well, that's fine. I'll just have my slaves over here, or
Right.
I'll just, run my, business that is illegal here. And I'm
Hmm.
not really breaking the law that way.
Yep. Do a little offshore gambling, as it were.
That's exactly right.
And then on the other side of things, we get the Bosch state, which is also not subject to the Federal Alliance rules,
Hmm.
but the social organization there and the ethics manifest much differently because they don't have slaves and things seem
Hmm.
to, it's not so sinister there.
Right. It is, it is a place where they don't keep thralls, but as Kat, figures out over the course of time. It's not that they actively do anything about people who are being kept as thralls, which kind of sticks in her craw. But it is, Bosch is a place where they are fiercely independent, and they want to run their business the way they want to run their business. So they have no desire to join up with the Federal Alliance.
Yeah, they wouldn't get anything out of it.
They wouldn't get anything out of it.
Yeah, they do sketchy stuff, like they do business with slave trading nations or slave holding entities, and they
run drugs.
Yeah, they run drugs. I'm kind of curious what glitter is. Or is it just kind of a
glitter is it's really somewhat of a fungus that also has a minerality to it that was discovered in some of the peat bogs when they were pulling out clay and things like that to build brick. And so it is not particularly addictive for most people. But it is something that people enjoy using. I'd say it's somewhere in between, cannabis and, psilocybin kind of mushroom sort of things.
Okay. One of the very few things, or one of the very few positive byproducts that comes from mining, I suppose.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
So what were your favorite parts of the book to write, and what were your favorite in terms of outcome? And I kind of suspect there's an overlap there.
Definitely an overlap. And it's sometimes hard to think just in terms of A Merry Life, because I think in terms of the entire series as well. But, for A Merry Life, I loved the, early meeting of Kat and Kat's early failures. That was a lot of fun. And then, running a, Spotify playlist in my head and also on my phone as I, worked on her becoming determined to get better. That was a lot of fun to write, and it was fun to see her kind of come into her own. I really, I like writing her adventurous parts. That's just a lot of fun when she's doing the extraction and being snarky and flirting with the man that she took with her on the extraction with Takai. That was an early part written very early, and it was a lot of fun. And then it was fun to go back and revise and flesh it out a little bit more. I certainly like writing Teddy and Kat interactions.
Oh yeah, that was a wonderful relationship. Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's whatever happens in the book, that's a relationship that keeps going no matter what. And it's a lot of fun to write that. And, I had a good relationship with my dad. And so, maybe that stemmed from that, but it was just really getting to know Teddy and developing that character. And then, showing that interaction between the two, that has been a lot of fun. And, I wouldn't say the part where Kat's having to talk about her trauma was enjoyable to write, but I did like how it came out. I also liked writing about Kat as, not just as a pirate who is, shooting and flying and rescuing people and extracting people and doing that, but I also liked writing about her as a mom, and the softer sides to her. To be able to kind of show that she is a whole person. Certainly I enjoyed that. There are parts that will show up later in the series that kind of add to that as well. So, I really enjoyed the book. And I probably could talk about each scene very in depth because of what I like about it, but that's not what we're here for.
Right. That
Um,
would maybe give a
so
little bit too much away.
yeah, so I loved, I really loved the whole idea of the book, and it was one of those things where, like I said, it had this big long draft. I had to find what was going to be the narrative arc of this portion of the story.
Mhm.
And so that was enjoyable to do, and it was fun to kind of see that develop. And I wanted to be able to make sure that the book was able to stand alone,
Mhm.
but also would lead people on into the next books.
Right. Yeah. The review, I'd like to just talk about a couple out of context scenes that
Mm-hmm.
really stuck with me.
Uh-huh.
Um, what is the painting that Kat refers to every so often? With, I think it's a man that's stranded. It looks like he's a pirate who got.
That is right up here. It is the Howard Pyle Marooned Man,
Okay.
painted in 1909.
Okay.
Howard Pyle did a whole bunch of paintings of pirates and all, and
Hmm.
that one is the one that Teddy's ancestor liberated at some point after the apocalypse.
Liberated. Good use of the word liberated. It looks as though it was liberated in a very positive way. Yeah, I liked how that came about, and
Yeah.
it was a. I don't. The running joke is the wrong phrase, but
Hmm.
I'm 52 years old, so I have problems with word recollection right now, and so
There we
it comes up. It comes up pretty frequently, and I thought it was a very good inclusion.
Yes.
So there are some cultural remnants from the 20th century, probably 21st
Hmm.
century as well, that are
Hmm.
still present. The painting being one, but also the music Kat listens to, and we never get an idea of what music she listens to. And I'm really curious what music she listens to, and I want it from straight from the
And
author's mouth.
and when the original draft, I had really some specific songs in there, but of course
Mhm.
you can't do that.
Oh,
Um,
is that a copyright thing?
I think there's a copyright thing
Okay,
on that, um, and I didn't want to find out
fair
after
enough.
after
Yep,
the
don't blame
fact.
you. Hmm.
She likes kind of hard post metal loud music to fly to, um, and but she likes a lot of the 20th 21st century kind of music.
Hmm.
Not as She's not as interested in the current day things,
Hmm.
and it's one of those things that developed because she didn't where she grew up, she didn't have a lot of exposure to any anything of historical nature like that. And so that was something that kind of developed after she got to Bosch and
Hmm.
got to the resources that Teddy and the Bosch Pirate Force have, and that is access to some of those things that lasted through the apocalypse.
Hmm.
The recordings were still there, and she was able to listen, and those are the ones that she enjoyed doing. So she likes hard rock and roll. She'll
Hmm.
like kind of old traditional stuff, but she's not big on like folk music, that sort of thing. Um, but she likes things that express her emotions.
I imagined her flying playlist was very similar to my exercise playlist on
Yeah,
Spotify.
yeah, it is. It's hard driving. Keep her moving.
Yep,
Yeah.
mostly just energy and sound,
Hmm.
and
That's right.
which would
Yep.
track. All right, pretty isolated here, but where Teddy keeps his camera. I'm really glad I'm not Teddy's camera. Very glad I'm not Teddy's camera.
That's
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
I don't know if we need to say a whole lot more about that, but oh my, okay.
That's right.
So,
Like,
okay,
well, Abernathy wasn't going to check there.
the guards certainly weren't. Yeah, and I don't blame
That's
them.
right.
But also, I don't want to say a flaw in Kat's personality, but the scene, her impulsiveness comes out where she sees Abernathy at the gala,
Hmm.
and her reaction is much different than the one I would think to be most effective, which is
Hmm.
I want him to know who I am, and I want him to know that I am going to get him sometime.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to hear how you approach
And
that
I think
scene
I think
writing
you
it.
can go with impulsiveness as a flaw. Kat is definitely impulsive to the point of being reckless at times. She can overreact, And her push at that, when she saw him, was to, yes, make sure that he knew who she was and that she was going to go after him. But there was a lot of past anger in there, and she just acted. She didn't think necessarily.
Yeah.
She started out, when she first saw him, thinking, which is why she spoke with Phil. But then once there was an opportunity, she just jumped on the opportunity. And that is classic Cat, to do something that maybe will have to require her to backpedal a little bit afterwards. But,
Yeah. But I can also imagine that reaction being a very psychologically healthy one, even if logistically it wasn't the best idea.
right.
Because if I can imagine her feeling, all right, if I just back down and hide, meld into the shadows when this guy is here, that just reinforces everything I've been feeling. And what I have to do is overcome this. And I have to, for myself, just let him know and stand up mentally to him.
Yep. And she was able to do that. And I think because of the things that she learned in her early years as in the Bosch Pirate Force, that she was capable and she was strong enough to take care of somebody who was a threat to her. That gave her that option to not fall back into her old abused person patterns, but step forward.
Yeah, that scene, I thought it was a really important one in the book. It didn't really change her personality, but it was recalcitrant in a way, in that she was overcoming something by doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, A Merry Life is the first in a 4-part series, after which there are 2 more novels involving Kat's children. Kat does have twin boys and a little girl who comes before them. So what can we expect from the subsequent books in the general narrative?
The series continues with watching Kat grow as a person and as a leader. She is very reticent to embrace any kind of leadership in the first book, and that is something that the world that she is in will keep kind of poking at her to see how far she's willing to go with being a leader. She's also dealing with her family and other family events. She has a partner and children by the time we close out A Merry Life, and so there are some aspects to her partner that kind of develop over the course of time that she has to address, and she has to learn to be able to function in a team, and so we see her develop that through particularly in the 3rd book and the 4th book.
Okay.
And she has Abernathy, because part of her focus is to get even with Abernathy, and so that is kind of a thread that moves through all of the books. The other 2 books, Unfurling the Sail is a young adult book, deals with Gray when she's 14, and
Gray is Kat's first daughter.
And she likes to sail, and she has a sailing race, ends up with a shipwreck, and ends up shipwrecked with an archenemy, which happens to be Abernathy's son.
Oh, convenient.
So, convenient. And then the newest book, Pirates Pact, is with the 2 boys, Kick and Mac, who are fraternal twin boys. The Pirates Pact is a middle grade book that deals with a weekend where they happen to find a treasure map, and they decide they're having some trouble kind of connecting, even though as they're growing older, because they're almost 11 years old, and they're kind of going off into 2 different paths, and this kind of brings them together, and where they're able to have a very nice time, pursuing this treasure, which then, of course, spirals into other things.
How old are they in the book?
They're 10 years old and they're going to be 11 soon in that one.
Oh, okay.
So basically a Pirates Pack takes place in the fall after Unfurling the Sails.
So you have a great deal of experience in the world of, you're self-published or are you through an independent
I am
publisher?
indie published, yes.
Okay. I'm actually not entirely sure what the difference is between being self-published and independent publishing.
I think it's just nomenclature. I
Okay.
think because sometimes self-published, carries with it, some baggage from the past of vanity presses and things like that.
Yeah.
So indie published seems to be the phrase that I hear the most.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I am published through Sooner Starter Press, which is a division of me. Um, and that's the press that I created, and actually
Hmm.
it's a small press now because I have actually published someone else's work under
Oh,
mine.
fantastic.
I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary, 2-year birthday for A Merry Life in a couple of weeks. So these books have come quickly.
Yeah, I'd say you've published 6 books in the span of 2 years.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very productive.
It is, and it's if you'd asked me 3 years ago or 4 years ago if this would ever happen, I would say, no, I don't want to write anything more than a couple of pages. But when the story's there, you strike while it's going. And so
Yeah.
my learning curve has been huge. And the first year leading up to publishing A Merry Life was, a fire hose of learning.
Hmm.
And the things I've learned is that independent publishing or self-publishing is not an individual occurrence. You have to
Hmm.
have a group. You have to get
Oh, okay. Hmm.
a community and a team together. I
Hmm.
would not have ever gotten it done if I hadn't had my book coach, Martha Bullen, and then finding a good, I have 2 good editors. I have my cover designers.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, I could do the cover designing myself.
Hmm.
Those tools are out there for authors, but I kind of fell in love with their style, and so I was able to find the pennies that I needed to
Hmm.
hire them, and they have done an awesome job with all of my
Hmm.
covers.
Yeah, the covers look
And
great, by the
yeah, I
way.
know I love them. I love them so. And having an audiobook narrator,
Hmm.
those kinds of things, and finding good audiobook producers, those are all part of assembling a team that
Hmm.
can make the words that I write a reality, for a published book. And so I've talked to a few other people who are interested in, writing their own. And there's so many different ways now. When I first had the draft, my belief was there was one way to publish because I am a person of a certain age.
Hmm.
And so I assumed, you have to get an agent, and then the agent gets a publisher, and then you wait and wait, and, and that pathway with lots
Hmm.
of gatekeeping. And it was a great amount of learning to figure out that, oh, there is traditional publishing. There's also hybrid publishing, and there's
Hmm.
also independent publishing and self-publishing. So um, going through that process and learning that, looking at making the connections of people that are in all of those camps and kind of talking about the pros and cons, becoming involved in different author groups. There's so many author groups out there, and I think it's
Hmm.
for new authors they have to really kind of look at what will actually serve them because there's plenty
Hmm.
of places to throw your money,
Yeah.
and you know at some point you're going to throw your money someplace and you're going to go, that was a bad idea.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah. I
it's just the
imagine it's
way of
just
it.
part of the process, isn't it?
It is. But, being a part of Ally and the Authors Guild and, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, those have been really great. As an independent author, I have the ability to go, well, my book is sci-fi because it's set 300 years in the future. It's speculative fiction. It's also a little bit of women's fiction. It's also action adventure. So
Hmm.
it doesn't. I think if I was doing traditional publishing, it would be very challenging to pigeonhole exactly where this book goes.
Yeah.
But I'm fortunate because I don't have to do that.
Yeah. The whole genre labeling thing is very frustrating at times.
It is, and you know, I have had challenges of looking at my books and going like, okay, what kind of comps do I have on this? It's like, well, this aspect has this comp and this, but
Hmm.
so be it.
Hmm.
I basically depend on readers to tell me what comps they would look at for it.
Yeah, yeah. Or what the target audience might be and what else they might be reading.
Exactly.
Try and be like someone else just to appeal to a certain population, I would think.
That's exactly right. And
Hmm.
that's in my writing process. One of the things I do is when I'm in the midst of writing, I don't do a lot of reading or watching movies or watching TV because I don't really want to be derivative.
Yeah.
Um, and so all of my entertainment, reading it, et cetera, all kind of comes in between books.
Hmm.
So, which is, I have a really big to be read pile because having done 6 books in a couple of years, there hasn't been a lot of in between time.
Right. Yeah. I'm floored with your level of productivity because it's incomprehensible to me how you published or wrote 6 books in the span of 2 years.
Yeah, and how it happened. I mean, certainly having that 110,000 word zero draft that then clearly went into 3 books,
Hmm.
certainly helped jumpstart that
Hmm.
aspect there. But it's coming along. Generally, I think I'm going to be like a 2 book a year person.
Hmm.
Um,
That's
I
still
know.
pretty, pretty productive, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, what advice would you give to authors or up and coming or new authors who have maybe a manuscript in hand and I use this word very loosely, who are near to publishing their book?
Well, a manuscript in hand, definitely would get it into readers' hands, and get, beta readers out there, alpha and beta readers, to give you feedback and be open to that feedback. I assumed that I would be pretty thin-skinned about critique of my writing,
Hmm.
but it turns out I'm not. Um,
Hmm.
which I was, that was one of those surprising things to learn. And I think it's important not to be thin skinned about it. Um, if somebody critiques it and doesn't like a certain aspect of your writing,
Hmm.
I think you're fine to stomp around and, kick things, not the dog, maybe just the couch or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But, and be upset about it and say unkind things under your breath and things like that. And then take a couple breaths and then look and see what they're actually saying. Because I
Hmm.
had an author read over something and make suggestions about it. And I, you know, sat around and whined about it for a little bit. And then it's like, that's really, if I do what she's saying, it's going to make my writing a lot better.
Hmm.
And it did. And so, you know, that's part of the process is listening to your readers and listening to people who have some input. So that would be the first thing I'd say for them. And then, get a team
Hmm.
that you can trust, and don't be upset if you have to change in the middle of something because that's the way it goes. As long as you have a team that you really like.
Hmm. So, a team. I haven't heard anyone refer to having a team like this. I've heard several authors refer to like I had an editor, I had beta readers, but what would a team consist of? You said you had, I mean, obviously beta readers, cover designer. You said you had a book coach. Is that
I
right?
have a book coach.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
Martha Bullen is a book coach. She doesn't coach like the writing process, because certainly you have book coaches that will coach with the writing process itself. She really is, a publication coach, and she's the reason it got published, because
Okay.
I would have sat on it and played with it and twisted it here and changed this
Hmm.
word there, and Martha got on our call and said, well, let's get your calendar out. If you want to do that, let's make sure this goes to the editor here. You'll get it back from there. You need to have this aspect done here. You need to make sure you get it out to people who can do an endorsement for the cover. All of those little steps. And then we'll publish on this day and launch on that day, which of course, for the first book, scared the absolute heck out of me. What? Am I really going to do this?
Right. Timelines, deadlines. This starts to look like a job all of a sudden.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, and that is, part of it that she is able to help me with is that there is part of it. This is a job. You do the creative portion, and then you have to actually get it into people's hands. And as she says, you also have to do your marketing, and which is not the part I love. Although I'm finding I'm loving it more and more because I really like talking about Kat and I like talking about writing. Great. So when I have those opportunities, I can do that marketing. And as Martha says, nobody can buy a book they haven't heard of.
Yeah, very true.
And so, having her has been hugely instrumental, but then also having I have two editors, one that does kind of developmental and copy editing, and then I get it back and I revise, and then the other does, copy editing and proofreading. And he also does developmental stuff. They basically do all the things, but it's nice to have, two different sets of eyes on it. And being able, having developed that kind of a team approach, I'm able to then say, all right, now with book number 6, I was able to know, yep, I have to do this in these steps and contact the people, contact my, people who are going to be doing the reading. And that's always still a challenge to find people to read and comment, and then get it out there for folks.
Well, Sarah, it's been wonderful having you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm sorry I didn't get to the second book, because in the second book in the series, you say you made a lot of people mad. And I didn't get to the part where I don't think I got to the part where you would make anyone mad yet, but I'm going to continue reading it. And
there you go. and
so
you can send me a little note going,
okay.
I get a lot of, I'm in an online community where a lot of the people are reading these books, and I get a lot of messages and texts going like, I can't believe you did that. Which just makes me so happy because, emotions and immersion, that's the kind of the name of the game there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what happens, and don't tell me right now. And that's why, but you'll probably get an angry face emoji from me in the very near future when I get to that part.
Perfect.
Okay. Wonderful. Sarah, we'll put the links to all your socials in the show notes. And I look forward to finishing the second book. And once again, everyone who's listening, the book we've been talking about is A Merry Life by Sarah Branson. Highly recommend it. And thank you once again for being here, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Nate. And it was delightful. I appreciate it.
Yep. I wish you all the success as an author.
Thank you so much.